The 101 about adapted physical education is that IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, specifically mandates physical education. And it's actually the only curriculum that is specifically noted in IDEA. IDEA mandates that physical education must be made available to all students and specially designed if necessary. This is if their same age peers, so especially in elementary, middle school, are getting it. It gets a little weird when we start talking about, high school and credits, and sometimes you can opt out. But if it's being given to their able-bodied peers, they must be given the opportunity to also participate. And again, specially designed if necessary. When we talk about adapted physical education, it's actually falls under this larger umbrella term, which is called adapted physical activity. And adapted physical activity is this kind of broad world. And I bring this up because this word is kind of the umbrella term, and sometimes we see an overlap within these different areas. So we have adapted physical education, that is physical education that's happening in a school. We have adapted recreation. So that's oftentimes, or therapeutic recreation, where we have recreational activities outside and outdoors. And again, these things can overlap, but we do have recreational therapists that often are doing these things too, and that is different. And then we have adapted or disability sport. So again, this could be something that we're seeing in the Paralympics, and that's often sports that are for people with disabilities. So again, adapted PE can incorporate a lot of these things, and these all kind of fall under this larger umbrella term of adapted physical activity. Adapted physical education, just a broad overview. Again, it's a service that is provided by IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So just like other special education services, it is available to students using FAPE, right? The Free and Appropriate Public Education. So it should be freely available from birth to 21. I will say, and this is federal law, I don't know often. I have heard of children at the age of 9 getting adapted physical education, but I think that is very rare. Oftentimes we'll start seeing it in early childhood. And it is a direct service. And this is one of the kind of definitions of it right here, is it delivers a diversified program of developmental activities, games, sports, aquatics to the interest, capacities, and limitations of students with disabilities. We'll get more into the kind of this concept of what is adapted physical education, but really it's specially designed to meet the unique needs of a child with a disability. And what I'll say before going on to this, and you might have these same kind of experiences, is that we know that students with disabilities, many of them often have really poor physical education experiences because these areas are often unstructured, and they often have PE teachers that only take one course in anything that's related to disability. So oftentimes they're having poor experiences, and these are places where students are still experiencing bullying or self-ridicule or social isolation. And so again, I think it's a really important area that we want to really make sure that is a quality experience for children, especially since this has to do a lot with quality of life and them being successful and happy, exercise and movement. Talking a little bit about the benefits of adapted physical education. So the benefits of adapted physical education are numerous, and these are just some kind of brief ones to kind of put in your back pocket. But because the benefits of adapted physical education services are basically the benefits of exercise and physical activity, and also the peer socialization that can occur. Research shows these ones specifically, such as we know that students are going to have better academic scores and fewer behavioral incidents if they're getting regular physical activity. And this is for kids with disabilities. They're going to have greater social interactions and positive relationships with peers. And there's a lot of ways to do this properly, rather than sometimes the dumping ground, quote unquote, that we'll see in physical education, where kids with disabilities are in a self-contained class for all day except for PE. And again, then they're going into a very, very strange room with a teacher that often only has one class that's been dedicated to learning about disability. But if it's done right, these are the things that can occur. And we can decrease things like depression, anxiety, and inappropriate behaviors. I mean, we can get really specific. I saw somebody say about, autism, there's a lot of research to say that repetitive movements and self-injurious movements that we might see in children with autism is greatly reduced with exercise. I saw someone with ataxia. Obviously, we can try to work with the PT and try to help their gait and do activities that work with their gait. And then again, increase sense of self and increase their, who they are and their worth. And again, to me, I'm really, really passionate about physical education because I believe that this is the curriculum that really it's supposed to be hitting the cognitive, physical, and social domains. And those are the areas that I think are necessary to have a quality educational experience. But again, there's a lot of issues with PE that often then it does not turn out that way. So as I was saying, we're going to talk a little bit more about how special education and physical education, again, meet. And I know I said this at the beginning, but it's really important for you all to understand that special education includes physical education. So it's clearly defined in the law, and I'm going to show you what some of the things that it says in the law. And again, it is the only curricular area, so math, science, social studies, not included within this law. However, physical education is, which tells me that there's something special about it a little bit. And again, I think it's because it's a very unique area where the body is put on display in a very unique way compared to other places. And if not done properly, the quote unquote disability can be put on display for others to see and perhaps ridicule if not done properly. In the law, it also says that IEP should also cover extracurricular activities, which we'll briefly talk about later and hopefully again next time, because that's another really important area. IDEA, again, defines physical education for us. So this is the federal law. And the way that they define physical education is physical and motor skill, fitness, fundamental motor skills and patterns, and skills in aquatics, dance, and individual and group games and sports. So, and this can include intramural and lifetime sports. And I'm not going to go through all of this, but this is the exact verbiage that is in the law right here. I just gave you the exact verbiage again for the definition, but then they go in and they explain special education means specially designed instruction at no cost to the parents. And again, this is that FAPE right here. Instruction conducted in the classroom, in the room, in hospitals and institutions and other settings. And that part right here is talking about least restrictive environment. And so when they're talking about what is special education, under right here, and if you looked up in the law, this is the number it's under, it says instruction in physical education. So again, this is important stuff in the law. And then within the law, again, it says that it defines it as I was just showing it to you. So in this definition of special education, PE is defined as the follows, what I already gave you. And it includes special education, adaptive PE, movement education, and motor development. So again, I'm just giving this to you because in my eyes, this is important information for you all to take away and to hold on to try to continue to advocate for your students. The next piece is to kind of consider, so APE and the IEP process, just like all other services, we need to think about goals and objectives, placement, extracurricular activities, which falls a little bit outside of PE, but oftentimes they're the content expert that can really help when we're talking about appropriate accommodations for extracurricular activities. And yes, appropriate accommodations are also required by law when we're talking about even varsity football. Okay. And APE and the PE teacher should be there at the IEP meeting if the area is being covered. In the transition process, APE and PE can also be covered, as well as recreational and leisure. Go to this real quick. This is actually on Wright's Law. Wright's Law is a parent advocacy website. I think it's got wonderful, tremendous information. They have a wonderful page that's on physical education. And so as you can see, they provide kind of the same definition I just gave you. They provide a lot of other kind of information. They give you laws that have to do with physical education. There's been some major ones dealing with preschool, denying mandatory PE instruction, and some other ones that we're going to continue to talk about a little bit. And then eligibility criteria, so whether or not students meet eligibility criteria. Sadly, Iowa does not have eligibility criteria for adaptive physical education. And then down here, they have a bunch of different handouts. And this one right here, I created with a team, about 2 years ago. And we just did a research study where we interviewed parents about their use of it. And we found that, they found it very, very helpful. And this is an IEP checklist to advocate effectively for adapted physical education services for parents as well as for the IEP team. As again, oftentimes the IEP team is sadly very unaware of what adapted physical education is, what it looks like, and what the laws are that prescribe it. Just to zoom in, I'll zoom in a little bit more. And this is a checklist that's.
And Scott, I believe this is the one you shared with me also, correct?
Yeah.
And
yes.
It is on the website for Ask Resource Center. So we also have it there for folks. All they have to do is go to askresource.org.
I will kind of point out a few areas, and we validated it with about 200 professionals. If you're talking about eligibility for services, this is the part of, do I get services or not? And just like all other areas, what should be happening is the IEP team should be running assessments. They should be meeting. They should be talking about, is there a motor delay? Is there other delays, social or cognitive delays that impedes their ability to access the physical education curriculum? And PE does have standards in a curriculum, just like all the other content areas. And if they're not performing at grade level, especially if they're about 2 grade levels below, they should be looking at whether they're eligible. All right, and this eligibility right here. So again, what you want to see is there a professional in education with the knowledge of motor development and PE? And have they evaluated your child's skills and abilities with regard to their PE curriculum? I have heard of many times PTs or even OTs doing this evaluation, and I really don't see any big problem with that if we're looking at motor skills. But then again, you'll see a lot of other things in here. And are they using appropriate testing instruments? So there are norm reference tests, just like all these other things. But this checklist is there because the IEP process can be overwhelming. So what are the things that I need to ask during each one of these processes, right? So we have the present level right here. And so present level, PE should be documented in the present level. They should be talking about recent PE evaluations. And this is if you are eligible for services, by the way. And then social engagement and relationships, all these things should be discussed. Okay, again, goals and objectives. If you are getting services, you should have adaptive physical education goals. And because, again, as I said earlier, adaptive physical education hits cognitive, social, and physical, you can have a goal in any or all of those, depending on your child's need. So you can have a socialization goal in physical education, which really does make a lot of sense since we should be working on things like team building, listening, communication. These are things to think about to try to advocate. And again, you can use this as the IEP team, or if you are not a parent and you're on the IEP team, or if you are a parent trying to advocate for it. And other things, what's the least restrictive environment for your child in the PE setting? Are they in an integrated classroom? Are they in a segregated classroom? I've heard a lot of students, again, like are in self-contained all day, and then they're put into PE just so that on the IEP, they can document that they're, with their same age peers for 15% of the day or whatever. And sometimes it's horrific because there's crazy sounds going on. The teacher's not equipped or not ready to work with them. Sometimes in PE, the classes are way bigger than they are in other areas. So what is the least restrictive environment? We should also be documenting the frequency and duration of PE services you get. So all these things, all right? And then there's a qualified PE teacher. Sadly, in Iowa, a qualified PE teacher is technically somebody that's taken one class. But there is about 14 states that have specific credentials to teach adapted physical education. Iowa's not one. So again, supplementary aids, what do they need to be successful? Do they need schedules? Do they need a paraeducator? All these things. And then we can talk about the transition process. This should be happening at 16, but can occur as early as 14, depending on the school you're in. These, again, can talk about how will your child access PE that includes recreational activities within their communities. I know a lot of PE teachers in certain places that go and take their students when they're older to the community, like the community YMCA, and they walk them through how do we use the locker room, how do we ask for equipment if we want to use something, what equipment is there, how do I maneuver through it. So all these things can be what a physical education teacher does. And again, discuss what are the foreseeable barriers to PE and recreational activities. All right. I'm a big advocate for quality of life. And oftentimes PE is a big part, can be a big part of that. And to me, like what I want my child to do is I want them to be happy. And oftentimes doing recreational activities can lead to happiness. So I want to be having these conversations. Does your PE teacher have a copy of your IEP? Sadly, I've heard so many times that they don't. That's problematic too. They might not even know the modifications or the things that are going that they're supposed to get. And they can get this extended school year with APE if it's deemed reasonable. Do they have a functional behavior assessment? Have you discussed extracurricular physical activities? Again, the PE teacher can be helpful because they are content specific, like they know sports often, but this should also be talking, with your athletic director or the coaches that you want to work with. And again, this is a whole big topic right here. And this is when parents do reach out to me, maybe once a month. And I would say this is the biggest thing that parents reach out to me about is my student or my child wants to be on the track team. And they said no. Well, that's against the law. So I get stuff like that. Sometimes I have to, say things like that's against the law. So just to kind of reiterate some of the other pieces that we talked about, I talked about LRE, least restrictive environment. So this is one way to kind of look at least restrictive environment and for our students with disabilities in a physical education setting. It can look a lot of different ways. Oftentimes we see kind of a two-part system in PE where it's either fully integrated into the general PE class or fully segregated. 90% of the time that's what's happening, but that's not what has to occur because the least restrictive environment is supposed to be by the curriculum and then by the student's needs. Maybe PE, they can be in a fully integrated or mostly, or maybe have a paraprofessional, which is this level 2. You could also do part-time special education class, as in like they could be in an APE class 1 day of the week and 3 days of the week they're in their general PE class. And they can also have one-on-one with a physical educator. So they can be working one-on-one with a PE teacher. The school I work with the most is River Hills. That's a special school. When I lived in Detroit, I would go to the child hospital and we would do PE lessons in the hospital setting. So just like all other curriculums, PE can be at any one of these environments, and it's up to us to advocate for them to be in the setting that meets their needs. The one thing I will say, I don't love that this is kind of shown in like a staircase, because the reality is whatever best fits your child is the least restrictive environment. And that's not always going to be this setting. But here are a variety, and I'll kind of just, I'll click on them and I'll show them, and we can share these. Some of these are authentic assessments, and this is created by a great place that's in Texas, and they have evaluation things, and they have all these kind of great ideas and overviews. They have surveys and they have videos to go over stuff. They have like, how do I look at basketball? They also have like a wheelchair motor assessment. Again, this is something functional that's supposed to be looking at for PE. So it's not just physical therapy, but it's looking at, are they able to do an overhand throw? And pretty much in a very, very simplistic way of kind of breaking it down. Are they able to do a chest pass for basketball, for volleyball, soccer, tennis? And then again, if you're seeing a lot of issues with these areas, and this is not like a norm reference one, there are those out there as well, but these are our nice authentic assessments for physical education. I'll highlight a few other ones here too. This one gets more into it, but this one is actually a norm referenced one, and it gets into, sorry, going all through this, but you do these different skills and such, but just kind of highlighting, there are kind of a whole lot of things. I'll show one more. So if I have any parents or people that are working with people with severe and profound disabilities, I personally think that PE, again, can be one of the greatest services that these students are getting. And this is another one, and it looks at doing a parent survey, asking the child, what are the things that, or asking the parent, what does the child like to do? They like to do hiking. What does the family like to do? They do dancing, running, exercising at home. And then having the child also decide, what physical activities do I enjoy? Selecting these or choosing which one of these would you like to do, and then trying to get them to do it. And then at some point, we can kind of take in this information and look at all these different pieces.
I'm just trying to think, if I'm a parent, how would I use that to advocate for myself at the school level? Because, Iowa is so unique, non-categorical. And I know that you and I connected because it came from the DE that there's a new piece of information that was shared out about adaptive PE. So maybe you can speak to a little bit of that too.
Well, first off, to the surveys, I think the surveys are used as a communication tool for our PE teachers. I'm a PE person. When I tell my students after my class, I take one class in adaptive physical education, that they're not ready to work with kids with disabilities. Most of the people that work with their students with disabilities have a master's degree, and they have one class that they've taken that covers all disability. Surveys are a tool to try to get communication going between the parents and the PE teacher, because my experience is that often it's not very great. This is me like calling out my own people a little bit here, okay? And then the second part that you talked about, Deb, is yes, I could show that too. It's very similar to the federal law, but self and a team over the summer, we worked with the DOE in Iowa, and we restructured and are kind of distributing the guidelines for adaptive physical education in the state of Iowa. And they said that they're really going to wait to promote it until after COVID, because that's what everyone's kind of thinking about right now. It's really very similar to the federal law, but I think it's important that the state also kind of acknowledges it, because we often have it. Does that kind of answer your question, Deb?
Yeah, and just again, what role families can take as they journey. The days of having somebody from a AEA come and help with all of that, that's been pretty minimized. So what can families do to advocate, to do an assessment, to see if their child would qualify for adaptive PE? What are ways that they can move that work forward or move that forward for their child?
I would say to use that checklist and to share it with the team. I think that's really like the starting point. And I would also, if your students are having a poor time in physical education, I would voice that. To me, this is oftentimes something that people don't really know anything about. It's something that we need to kind of bring awareness to, and we need to ask for. But these are services that you should be getting if you need them.
Yeah, and I think you just hit on a really important point, that to bring that awareness and to seek that support and guidance if your child needs that. You just don't have to keep saying, well, it was a bad day. You can do and be an advocate to get the kinds of supports that the child needs to be successful.
9 times out of 10, if a child's getting physical therapy, they should be getting adapted physical education. We then also find, though, we have a lot of kids that have behavioral issues that are also not able to access the curriculum, or intellectual disabilities. In states like California, Minnesota, Texas, Maryland, where adaptive physical education is a lot more prescribed, California has oftentimes 40 APE teachers per district. And Minnesota actually has something kind of similar, maybe not quite as many because it's not as large, but Iowa, we don't do it. There are a few APE people out there. One local celebrity is Anne Griffin. It's something that if we don't ask for it, it doesn't exist. It's something that I think that personally that we need to advocate for on a state level for sure. And what also we can do is we can provide the PE teachers with the training and the support, because they really don't have it. And that's also something for us to know, is that they don't have it. So
it sounds like, Scott, you could be a resource to a family member if they bumped up against a concern. It sounds like you would be available to problem solve and help kind of unlayer it, since it is more complicated in Iowa. Nobody's put any questions into the question and answer or chat, but certainly if you do, I don't want to lead the group here astray, but I just think about myself as a family member and, what if and how do we navigate it, since Iowa, unique, but not unique, right? The law is the law, and IDEA does say everybody should have access to PE and have equal opportunity.
Other things, again, is that this is a really unique kind of content area, and there's so many stories in here. I mean, there's a lot of students with disabilities, especially emotional or intellectual, that really love physical education, or if they have a good teacher that really, really tries, things can be really, really positive. I hear so many horror stories where students are basically scarred from their PE experiences. And it's an area that's oftentimes the person's not trained at an adequate level. There's often, like, especially if they're going into the locker room, it can be a lot less structured. And then PE is very unique in the way that the body is put on display. So, one example of that is if a student does poorly on their math test, nobody knows that. But if we're doing a basketball unit and, Johnny does poorly on that, everyone knows that. So the disability is put on display in a very, very unique way. And again, this is where we have to try to have people that have some specialty working with our students so that they're having a quality experience. Now, to get that, I don't have the golden ticket.
This is from Susan. How is a teacher able to include kids whose physical skill levels are so drastically different?
You can do it. We want to create an environment, first off, that's open to kind of having all those things. Oftentimes we will see that PE teachers either teach to kids with disabilities or kids that struggle motorly, or they'll teach only to the athletes, right? Well, we want to create an environment where, there's kind of a lot of different skill levels and such, and that's okay. That's kind of number one. When you have really big skill differences, it's just good teaching. So, the reality is good physical education is adapted physical education. So when you're talking about how do we meet all these students' needs, it's really through differentiation and using universal design principles. And that can be, if I have a basketball hoop, I put hula hoops on it so that there's different targets for them to shoot on and be successful with practicing the motor skill. It's maybe not always having sports as the focus. We can do things like cooperative leadership games and make that a focus of a class versus, again, always sports. Another concept that is something I advocate for my students is to include disability sports within their units. So if you're going to do a volleyball unit, why not do a sitting volleyball component of that? And that actually empowers disability in a way that I think is unique. And you can do that even if you don't have a child in the class that would, be able to really participate at, like, at the collegiate level in that. But it's a great way to empower disability and teach to disability because they have a rich history in sport.
This is going to be recorded. It will be on the Ask Resource website. And we have a variety of videos on there. Scott's also a resource at UNI that you can reach out. I guess I'm offering his services, but I do know that he would be able to visit with individual parents if they wanted to. So, and next week, Scott's going to follow up with us about continuing this conversation around not just adaptive PE, but those other opportunities that we want kids to have that well-rounded experience within their comprehensive setting.
Next week, I was hoping to talk about best practices. So something that someone kind of referenced, so I could talk a little bit about partner physical education and changing rules and equipment and talking a little bit about that UDL, and then also talk about the extracurricular component too. So Dear Colleague letters are letters that are sent by, I believe it's the Federal Register or Government Accountability Office. So anyways, big, government place sends these Dear Colleague letters out to oftentimes superintendents or departments of education. And they're often because of large court cases or seeing that there's been big issues or misinterpretations of the law. So this one came out, and oftentimes these are things that people read and then they disseminate out to the schools. And this one came out, I think, about 10 years ago now. However, I think it's really important. This one's on extracurricular activities. There's another great one on physical education in preschool and another one on transition services. But this information is supposed to guide us a little bit better. And it's also saying, hey, these things are not always happening very well. So when we're talking about extracurricular activities, we cannot rely on generalizations and stereotypes. And I know that might sound silly, but this really does happen still in a sports setting. So you have a coach who's coaching varsity swimming or something, and they see a child with a visual impairment and they say no, because they can't wrap their mind around it. And again, they've been given little to no training on this. We must have a form of assessment on performance for denial of participation in sports programs. All right. So we can't cut somebody from a team based on a disability. That is illegal. And they must be given reasonable modifications to extracurricular activities. and this is actually not through IDEA, this is through Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, but we cannot discriminate based solely on disability. And if we are going to cut students, all of them need to be given the same assessment, and we need to give them reasonable modifications. So maybe that's a sighted guide runner with them on a track and field team, or maybe that's additional verbal prompts. So whatever that is, and again, they can be cut, but they have to have a way that they're doing it systematically. Ensuring equal opportunity for participation. Students are entitled to tryouts rather than participation for these extracurricular activities. It is okay if they are cut, but again, if they're cut from the team, that means that there has to be a systematic way that they're doing it, and they're doing it for everybody. All right, because that, I mean, when we start talking about, I lived in Texas for 4 years. 60 kids and every high school were cut from the football team. So it's okay for that to happen. It just has to be with reasonable accommodations. And this can happen again for school-sponsored interscholastic teams, alternative activities such as clubs, intramurals, and such. These were reiterating parts of the law. This part was a suggestion, so not mandated by law. Let me just say that, not mandated by law, sadly. They suggested that schools, because they found through this report they did prior to this Dear Colleague letter, that students with disabilities rarely have extracurricular activities. And as somebody just pointed out, and if they have them, as Alicia just said, if they have the ability, it's often not in the role of an athlete versus this kind of secondary role, which is also okay if they want that role. The opportunity of being an athlete should be something that we're trying to make available to all students, because it's a great experience and a great way to grow as an individual, to compete, and to, again, like kind of achieve like milestones that I'm interested in, and be my personal best. So one idea they had is offering more separate or different athletic opportunities. This can be in the form of Special Olympics. This could be having a disability specific sports club, or it could, again, just having additional like divisions of a different team. When I was in Wisconsin once, and they were showing me all the schools, and they had a program that was between like 5 of the different counties, and they came together twice a month, and it was ran by their adapted PE teachers, and they would basically play different sports at a competitive level. And it wasn't associated with any of the Special Olympics or anything like that, but it was awesome. This is something I'm a big proponent of, because again, I want students to have opportunities, and I want them to have fulfillment. This is the Department of Education has a list of all of these things here. How does this apply to you, and what can I do to help you? I know I've given you like a very like broad view and like shown you kind of the IEP and laws, surface level kind of ideas on this, but obviously there's a lot more to the nitty gritty of it. I want to know what are your thoughts? How does this apply to you?
That checklist, I think, is very helpful. And again, you can find that on our Ask Resource website. Hopefully this prompted folks to start to look at maybe opportunities for their kids in a little bit different lens. Alicia wrote, I'm excited to hear about extracurriculars. Our daughter has only ever participated in Courage League sports versus school-sponsored sports. I love the idea that Wisconsin did. And that'll be next week.
And Alicia, like, I don't think that oftentimes your IEP team's thinking about this stuff. I really wish they would. And again, it's something, and there's a component of the IEP that is supposed to be specific. Again, every IEP is different, so maybe you have to put it in like a different section, but the IEP is supposed to talk about extracurriculars. Now, I don't know how old your daughter is, but if you're talking about transition services and such, I think that extracurriculars and recreation should be a vital component of what you're talking about. It's one of the main components of transition plans, but it's the one that, even in my experience when I was in IEP meetings, it was the one that was glossed over the most. Basically like a nothing where they talked about it. But myself, my family, who I am, a big part of who I am is partaking in recreational activities and physical activity. I just think it's vital.
Yeah, spot on, Scott. Yes. So she's younger. Sports teams have been so competitive that it's intimidating when you're with your skill level. So spot on.
Yeah. Even that too, like, again, our sport teams, school sponsored, a lot of them don't have any background in this stuff. And the reason I give this 101 the way I do is it's oftentimes just kind of like dipping people's toes into these concepts. And we have to do this sometimes for our coaches. A lot of our coaches and teachers sometimes, especially when they're from that kind of athletic, muscle-head kind of viewpoint, they don't even consider that they're supposed to be teaching kids with disabilities, sadly. So, these are things that we have to first just even say, you're supposed to be doing, like, they're part of it too. And then they're supposed to be getting something out of it. And they should be like competing. Like, competition is a part of like who we are. And like it's an art form. It's part of our society. And to exclude people with disabilities on the basis that they have a disability is horrendous. I have a podcast. I'll show it again next time. And I have a whole bunch of things on research and the transition process, advocacy, if you want to talk about specific disabilities, again, broadly talked about. We went through these concepts, and again, maybe more depth is needed, or if you need more, I can give more.
Well, thank you, Scott. We do get him back next week. So if you have an interest in learning a little bit more, twofold. One, he wants to be of service to families. And the second thing is he's good to take questions. And so that's great. I mean, his expertise, he's willing to share and problem solve. So thank you, Scott, for very informative. It's an untapped area, and we need to continue to advocate and let families know that this is something that they can advocate for their kids. And there's the Scotts out there that can help guide some of that work, and Ask Resource Center. Well, thanks, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this and Ask an Expert with Scott around adaptive PE and the law. Thank you, and have a good evening.